E agora sim, a gente vai já começar então aqui a nossa primeira palestra do dia de hoje, que vai trabalhar o título O Perigo Crescente de Ransomware Criminoso em Indústrias Críticas. O nosso palestrante internacional é um especialista em segurança cibernética de tecnologia operacional, ou TI, e sistema de controle industrial, ICS, reconhecido globalmente e que colabora com a indústria, governo e academia para aumentar a conscientização sobre os crescentes riscos de segurança que afetam a infraestrutura crítica e a necessidade de tomar medidas para mitigá-los. Como vice-presidente de Segurança de Tecnologia Operacional da Tenable, Edwards trabalha com líderes governamentais e do setor em todo o mundo para ampliar a compreensão e a implementação de soluções de pessoas, processos e tecnologia para reduzir o risco cibernético em geral. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Marty Edwards.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, and good morning. Bom dia. That will be about all the Portuguese you hear from me this morning, so I apologize with my presentation in English. Today, I wanted to talk to you, or they asked me to talk to you about ransomware in critical infrastructure and in the OT environments. You know, we don't necessarily see in the news a lot of things about ransomware that are in these control system environments, but I can assure you that if you talk to your friends that there has been incidents in these systems, right? So we will talk a little bit about that, and keep any notes because we will be coming back, as Felix said, for the questions and answers later, right? So here's the description of what we're going to talk about. You know, so ransomware, I think, is probably the biggest threat right now that we face in information security, in cybersecurity. And I've predicted for quite some time that I think that what's going to happen is we will see these criminal groups start to pivot or move into these industrial operations. And of course, we've seen this with things like the Colonial Pipeline, or with the JBS meets, or with the Is incidents and the Maersk, FedEx, TNT, which I will go into each of these sort of examples and talk through, right? So that we can get a little bit better understanding. And people ask, they go, well, why? Why are these criminals, Marty, do you think they're going to move into these critical environments? And, you know, there was a bank robber in the United States many hundred years ago. And they asked the bank robber, they said, well, why do you rob the banks? And he said, it's simple. That's where the money is. Meaning that the bank robber would go anywhere. He would go to rob your house, he would go to rob the store, but he went to rob the bank because that's where the money is. And guess what? If you're manufacturing something that is valuable, if you are providing a critical service such as water or electricity or gasoline or something like that to a society, those are valuable things, and the criminals will go where that value exists, right? So let's talk about risk a little bit, right? And I know that most of you are industrial security people. Thank you, because I am an industrial engineer. That's where I come from, right? I come from these industries. Primarily for me, it was pulp and paper. So taking trees and making paper out of the trees. But I think that when we look at how we invest in a company, we spend a lot of money on the information technology side, on the enterprise side. We all have to take the stupid phishing tests, right? Where it's like, oh, the gasoline prices are going up, and so they send you an email that says, oh, here's a coupon to take for a discount for gasoline, and everybody clicks. And then you get the slap on the wrist. And in some companies I've heard, you know, you do that 3 times and you're out, they fire you. Which is no good. I'm an advocate for positive reinforcement, not punishment or negative things, right? So we spend a lot of money in the corporate side, but we don't spend enough money, I think, in the OT side for cybersecurity. You know, and if you look at where your risk is in your organization, I guarantee you it's where you can have a safety impact or where you can have impact to production or to the manufacturing process, right? So I think that when you look at that, you know, the CEO or the boss, the board of directors of companies, they ask me, well, do we need to spend more on security? And I tell them, I said, I don't think so. I actually don't think so. I think you need to spend it smarter. So you need to spend what you are spending, but you need to pivot it and spend it more on the OT environment or the critical infrastructure environment, right? This one is probably a review for your audience, you know, but there's some differences, cultural differences in the people that maintain these systems, right? You work with your information security counterparts, or if you're in IT, you work with your OT engineers. You know, we come from different places. The IT people tend to come with business backgrounds, finance backgrounds, commercial business, mass MBA type of background. Whereas on the OT side, you know, we are engineers, right? And we are plant people, operations people. And sometimes in companies, you get these silos or you get these cultural challenges that are very difficult to overcome. But I think what I can assure you is that at the end of the day, we are all working for the same company. We're all trying to deliver the same service to our customers, right? We're all trying to make value or make money for the shareholders of the company. So there are common things that you can talk about, and I think that once you start to meet or start to work together more closely, you find that you have more things in common than what you have apart, right? So, you know, have a cup of coffee, go have a glass of wine after dinner or at work. You know, get to know these people, right? Get to know these people that together you need to secure the systems. They're not going to secure themselves, right? So we have to secure them, and we need to secure them as a team. Now, this is something that's sort of a passion of mine. I hear so many people talk about air gap, air gap, air gap. Oh, it's okay. It's okay. Our system is air gap. Bullshit. You might think it's air gapped, but a friend of mine, Eric Byers, one of the pioneers in control system security, many years ago we were doing a study, and he said, you know, every time companies come and they say, oh, we are safe because we're air gapped, they go, oh, well, how are you getting the engineering drawings, or how do you do the configuration change control inside of this environment? And they say, oh, we have a floppy disk, or we have a CD-ROM, or we have a removable hard drive that we move. I'll say, there is no air gap. If you're moving data in and out of these environments, you do not have an air gap. That is being breached, right? And yes, I have worked in the government, so I have worked in national security type of implementations or installations, and you can maintain an air gap, right? Nuclear generation does it all the time. It's very, very expensive. It requires a lot of people and a lot of discipline, and sometimes people with guns to make sure that you're not plugging something into the wrong computer or the wrong place. So, you know, I would urge you that if you think that you are protected because you have an air gap, you should be asking some very hard questions. How do you do remote access? Do your vendors ever come in? Okay, well, that's a way around the air gap. How are you doing firmware updates? How is the vendor coming in and updating your system? Are they bringing in a laptop and plugging it into your system? Okay, that's another way around the air gap, right? So you have to start asking these hard questions, and it's okay. It's okay to have these exceptions, but you need to be paying a lot of attention to every one of those exceptions and having procedures that you're documenting. Okay, this vendor came in with this laptop at this time, and they plugged it in, and this is what we did, and here's the log. Every change, right? You're logging all the changes, all the way along. So anyway, I get a little passionate about the air gap thing. Okay, now let's start talking about some of the topic here. the ransomware. So Colonial Pipeline, how many have heard of this? Probably everybody, right? No? Not enough people. So in the United States, the Colonial Pipeline is a intermediate products pipeline, final products pipeline. So gasoline, jet fuel, diesel fuel, ethanol, things like this that are transported from the refineries, which are in the south, in Texas and Louisiana. They transport this up the east coast of the United States to Washington, D.C., New York, New Jersey, to the consumers, right? And just over 1 year ago, this pipeline was shut down for 1 week because of a ransomware incident. And I'll tell you that this single incident probably woke up the US government and the American taxpayer or American citizen as to what the impacts of cybersecurity problems could be. Lots of money changed hands. There was 75 Bitcoin, which at that time was worth about $4.5 million US dollars, significantly lower now. In fact, I asked one of my colleagues in the FBI here last week, I said, hey, has the decreasing value of cryptocurrency changed the tactics of any of these ransomware operators? And the person said no. They just basically ask now for how many US dollars worth of cryptocurrency that they want, instead of asking for how many Bitcoins or that they want. So, you know, criminals, they go back and forth and they take advantage of you, right? So they're going to ask whichever one is more advantageous to them. You know, and the Colonial Pipeline paid. They paid the ransom, right? But the decryptor tool that they got was not very good. So it was very slow, did not really recover 100% of the data in all times. So it's challenging, right? But this was main front page news in the US, right? So things like no fuel at the gas pumps, right? So the yellow tape across the gas pump, we're out of gas. I think it was Washington, D.C., yeah, 87% of the gas stations in Washington, D.C. had no fuel. And so what happens, and I don't know if it's as bad in Brazil or in South America as it is in the United States, but anytime there's a hurricane or some sort of disaster or something like this happens, everybody panic. They all go to the store, they buy the water, the bread, the beer, cerveza. You know, they all want to stock up on the essentials, right? And so as soon as somebody says, oh, there's a cyber attack and there's no gasoline coming in this pipeline, everybody gets in their car and they drive to the gas station, even if the car is already on half tank of gas. It's like, why? I'm sitting there, I just get my popcorn. It's like, why? Why are you panicking? If you just stay home and do the normal things, it will come back. You know, we have to have a little bit more faith, I think, in the resiliency of our systems to recover. So when I'm giving this talk in the United States, I'm trying to encourage people, don't panic. You know, you should have the basic emergency supplies or enough. You know, my father taught me, my father was a truck driver. He always would get mad if we brought the car back with under 1/2 a tank of fuel. It's like, ooh, you need to make sure that it's always close to the top when you bring the car home or the truck home. Yeah, I ran the truck out of diesel fuel only one time. That was the only time. If you look at this Colonial incident, you know, even though they shut the pipeline down, it was not the operational technology, right? It was not the SCADA system that was impacted. It was the system that was used for the billing and the custody transfer. So the flow meters, they have the special flow meters that are the calibrated ones that say how much fuel went to this tank or to this customer. You know, we pay 100,000 gallons went to this place here. And so that they use that billing system. And you know, I think that what you need to do is you need to evaluate very carefully what the criticality of these systems are. I do not think that Colonial realized that this system was so important for their operation, right? If they did, they would have had some sort of manual backup, you know, bring out the pieces of paper and somebody goes and reads the meters and at least some way to keep the fuel going, right? I believe they made the right decision when the operations people, when they shut the pipeline down, right? They had a risk of losing view or losing control of the pipeline. And so, you know, the person in the control room had to make the decision to push the big red button. That's a hard decision to make. I know, I've been there, but you have to do it. And so I think they made the right decision. How did they get in? My understanding is that the attackers compromised one account, one password on a legacy VPN remote access system. And it was from an employee that was no longer with the company, right? It was an old password that should have been deprecated out of use. And with that one password, they got in and then they spread laterally, right? They get in, they elevate credentials, privileges, and then they crawl all over your networks. And with the new convergence of all of our networks being interconnected, it does not take long to, you know, to have these kinds of problems. Okay, so the next one. This one, ransomware, maybe, but maybe not, right? So 5 years ago this week, in fact, I think it was yesterday or 2 days ago, was the anniversary of NotPetya. So the best sort of case study I've seen of NotPetya that's public is the Chief Information Security Officer for the shipping company Maersk has been at several conferences in Europe and around the world talking about how they responded or reacted to this. So in this case, the shipping company, they had no problem driving the ships. They had no problem with the cranes offloading the ships. They had no problems with the actual sort of physics of moving things. But the system that kept track of the bill of lading, the system that kept track of what was inside of each container became encrypted. So they did not know what cargo was in what box, and they did not know who the customer was, and they did not know who the shipper was. And so essentially, all of these ships in massive ports all around the world just stopped. This cost them, well, here, 62 billion in US dollars 5 years ago. This is a lot of money, right? Billion, that's a B, right? Big, no, that's their revenue. I'm sorry, I got the wrong numbers. It's 250 million. It's still big numbers, right? They posted an enormous loss in the quarter that occurred. And NotPetya, you know, NotPetya was very indiscriminate. It was basically like a nuclear bomb that went off inside of information security that day 5 years ago, right? Many companies got impacted. So the pharmaceutical manufacturing company, Merck, was another one. Another one that I talked to is FedEx. Their European subsidiary, TNT, was impacted. And that was another, it was 400 million US dollars, right? So globally, they say the impact from NotPetya is $10 billion, right? These are not small numbers. These are events that when they happen to your company, unless your company is Maersk or FedEx or big company, this could kill your company, right? These can be company-ending events. There have been many companies that have gone bankrupt because of a ransomware impact, right? Because of an event like that. So what was NotPetya? So what is Petcha first? So Petcha is a ransomware toolkit, right? And so it's normal criminal ransomware as a service toolkit. NotPetya was very similar, so it was a modified version of Petcha, but it was allegedly developed by the Russian government, and it was used as a weapon, essentially. And there were no decryptor tools, right? So you could send the Bitcoin to this wallet, and they took your money, but there was no way in the code, in the programming that encrypted everything, there was no way to decrypt it, right? They intentionally was using it just to destroy data. And it used the Eternal Blue and the Mimikatz, right, which are very serious vulnerabilities and issues, right? So very, very serious set of attacks, right? You need to be prepared for when this happens to your company. You need to have sort of a tabletop exercise, or you need to think through, how will we react? Because I believe almost in every company, it's not a matter of if this happens. It's a matter of when this happens to you and how big is the impact going to be. Can we contain it quickly? Can we isolate those networks and segments? Do we have the right tools in place to be able to respond and clean up all of this? And how does this impact operational technology? Well, if you look at operational technology, it uses so much commercial off-the-shelf technology now, right? So your human-machine interface, your engineering workstation, your historian, all of these things are running on Windows or on a version of Linux. It's all commercial stuff, right? So all of these malware families that are leveraged by these criminal ransomware operators, and I use the word criminal intentionally, right? These gangs where you have ransomware as a service, I mean, they are like businesses. They have a help desk. You buy, if I'm a criminal and I want to attack you, I call them up with using the onion router and the dark web. I call them up and I say, hey, I want to buy some ransomware to, take over some Brazilian infrastructure. They go, okay, how many nodes, and okay, $10,000 US, you can have the package. And if it doesn't work, you call this 1-800 number, call this toll-free number, and we will help modify it to make sure that your target works. Or, oh, do you need us to help you with moving the money, money laundering, money mule stuff, because, we can help you put the money into a Swiss bank account. Okay, so do not underestimate these people. This is not your street gangs, right? These are organized crime, nation-state sort of level organizations that we're dealing with here. And they're looking at these types of basic vulnerabilities to get in. Most of the ransomware, almost all of the ransomware, this is not some new zero-day, wicked, cool, technology they're using, right? They're using stuff that should have been patched 5 years ago, 10 years ago. Look, I mean, Conficker, MS-08, 067, 08, let's see, do the math. It's 2022. This was 2008. I guarantee you, if you are all OT people here, I guarantee you, in fact, I would almost make a bet, but I don't want to use my valuable dollars, that somebody in here has an OT system that is not patched for Conficker. That I could pull out my USB stick with Conficker on it that's 15 years old, and I could walk into the plant and plug it in, and it would shut you down. I can almost guarantee that, because we see it. We see it all every day, right? Why? If we know what the problem is, why do we not at least try to fix some of the problems, right? And I get it. This system's 30 years old. The vendor says you can't make any changes to it. You're maybe in mining or in an industry that's not making a lot of money. I get it, but you need to prioritize, or your bosses, the board of directors needs to prioritize, and you need to be able to explain the risk to them in a way that they understand it, so that they can go, oh, okay, I understand. We're at risk here, so we will spend a little bit of money to try to help, right? To try to improve the system. Another one, JBS meats, very close to home for Brazil, right? giant global meat company that's headquartered here in Brazil. So they had issues in United States, Canada, and Australia that knocked out their system. Now, my understanding is that this, again, was not necessarily the OT system. I think, if I remember right, it was a maintenance package that they used to keep track of the sharpening of the saws and the processing equipment. So you have to have everything very sharp to cut the meat, and if you don't, you risk breaking the tools and having contamination in the meat products. So the regulations say that they have to keep track of when all these tools were sharpened. And when that went away, they could no longer meet the regulatory requirements because they couldn't prove that they had sharpened the knife or the saw at the right time. So again, the point with these ones, I think, is that it's always the system that you have forgotten about or that you don't remember. It's the server that's under somebody's desk that when you're the audit team, you miss or you don't see it right away, right? It's always these sort of systems on the side that is where your risk is. And in my experience, a lot of those systems are the OT and the industrial control and the more cyber-physical types of systems, right? That's where you will get caught, right? Is when these kinds of systems that you're not paying enough attention to are the ones that get locked up. And you know, one other thing here I think that's important is you know, people ask, well, what does the ransomware do? And I think everybody understands that ransomware encrypts the data that's on your system, right? So you encrypt all of the files, all of the hard drive, and then they want you to pay for the key to decrypt it all. The other aspect that happens in these cases is double extortion, where they lock all of your data up, but before they encrypt it all, they have copied it all out to their own website or cloud provider. They have their own storage provider. The criminal gangs run their own sort of criminal cloud services, I guess you would call it. And then they are going to extort you to say, if you don't pay us, we're going to post this online, or we're going to disclose this data. Now for us in OT, it's a little bit less of an issue, right? Because we don't care. I don't care. Tell them how many gallons of water is in the tank. It doesn't matter to me. It's different than healthcare or personally identifiable information or credit card data, right? But it's still an aspect. And you're still dealing with criminals. So my point, I think, is even if you pay, do you really trust the criminal not to do something? Or they say they're going to delete your data, or they tell you something. They're criminals, right? This is what they do for a living. So I am not a big advocate for paying the ransom. Most, I think, professionals would say, oh, you probably shouldn't pay the ransom. But you know what? If you have no other choice, right? If you do not have good backups or you do not have a good plan for recovery, maybe paying $10 million US dollars is not that bad of a thing when you're losing, that much money every day, right? And so these are hard decisions, right? Very hard decisions, and a decision that I'm not going to make, decision that probably most of you are not going to make either, right? This is going to be the CEO of the company, or this is going to be the board of directors that's going to be authorizing these types of payments, right? So how do we protect against this, right? So let's get to some solutions. Marty talks lots about problems. Let's get to solutions. This one might be a little bit counterintuitive because I work for Tenable, we sell technology, right? Yeah, don't worry about that yet. The first thing you need to do, make sure you have backups. I can't stress that enough. When I was in industry, we had automated backups. Every night, everything gets copied to tape, and every morning somebody gets the briefcase, and they change the tapes, and they carry the briefcase out, and it goes somewhere to a different site so that you have off-site storage, right? Would you ever test it? Did you ever actually take the tape and try to put it back in to see if it worked? You should try that once in a while. It's surprising how how many mistakes, you know, and people realize they go to their backups and they have, well, we have 1 month of backups. See, it's all here. Every one of them is empty. There's nothing there because we didn't test it. And somebody made a change, and the script that is supposed to do all the backups, you know, was not working right. You know, so you need to test. You need to test. And backups is not just copying the software or the files, right? If you're in OT, it's the logic. It's the settings. It's the switch settings on the card in the PLC. You need to make sure that you understand every configurable change in the entire system. That's not easy either, right? And you need to have all of that information not sitting on the hard drive that's going to get encrypted. Because if, oh, well, I have a spreadsheet. I have a spreadsheet that has all the settings for the firewalls and the switches and the routers. I have all of these. It's in an Excel spreadsheet right here on my desktop. What happens when your desktop gets encrypted? That Excel spreadsheet is no longer there, right? So you need to have that. I'm an advocate of an old-fashioned book, right? You need to print. Some of this stuff you need to print on paper. Others, you need to make sure the copies are in offline storage somewhere, right? And there are cloud service providers that have sort of a vault set up that you can push the data into, and they will guarantee that you have access to it. You have to pay for it, right? You know, many people, especially in the electricity sector, they go, oh, well, we have a backup station. So over here is a primary control room with all the screens. We're running the power grid, and 100 kilometers away, we have the backup redundant center, because the regulations require that, right? So if we have a fire or we have some sort of natural disaster, we can switch over. Well, guess what? There's a wire there's fiber optics between them, right? So if this gets encrypted, lots of times this gets encrypted too. So you need to make sure that you have that isolation in your backups, right? You have that offline storage. I talked about testing the backups, but you need to test your people too, right? I think the biggest thing you can do with regards to ransomware is sitting down as a team, doing a tabletop exercise, and asking the questions, the hard questions. What happens? What do we do if this happens to us? Who do we call? Who is the person in your company that's going to authorize $10 million US to get paid by Bitcoin? Do you know how to pay someone by Bitcoin? You know, do you have their phone number? Well, it's in the Excel spreadsheet. It's on the online system. I'm going to use Slack. I'm going to use WhatsApp. No, it's all encrypted. You don't have access to this, right? So make sure you have an offline, out-of-band communications mechanism, right, that you can use to reach these people, to ask these questions. What are you going to say to the press? What's the press release going to look like? That press release should be written already, right? You should write that press release today for the ransomware attack you might have in 2 weeks, 2 months, 2 years. What are we going to say? How are we going to communicate this to our customers? How are we going to communicate this to our shareholders? How are we going to communicate this to our employees? How do we calm and give our employees confidence that we're going to be able to pay them? One of the biggest problems with ransomware in some of these companies is that they lose payroll. They do not have the capability to send money to your bank account. That's bad from a company perspective. Your employees will not like it. So how do you make sure that you've tested all of these things? This is a big cross-functional team, right? You need to have these kinds of meetings, these kinds of exercises, and talk about how are we going to deal with these things when they happen. And be very honest, right? I mean, it's not an opportunity to play games, right? This is serious stuff, and you need to look at it very serious. I also think it's a good opportunity to get some of your government partners involved. You know, so in the United States, I would encourage you to talk to the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the federal police. I'm not sure in Brazil what help you have from the federal or state governments, but lots of times they have already done some of these types of exercises, maybe in the military or things like that, and they can help you with those playbooks, right? They can help guide you through some of that. Or there's resources available, best practices, things like that online, or there's companies that will help you, that will come in and help design that type of thing. Okay, now we start to talk about technology a little bit, now that you have backups and you know what to do. So now you need to start, I think the first step is to go and get good asset inventory. You need to identify all these devices, right? And it's not going to be good enough to walk around with a clipboard and be looking for the server underneath the desk. You should have some automation in place to go to all of your environments and find out, what do I have? What is it connected to? What are the communications pathways between all of these networks and devices and things everywhere? And then once you've got that down, now you can start to prioritize. You can say, in this exercise, you can say, well, what about this? What about this network over here? What about this system? Is it important to how we do our business? Yes? No? Is it more important than this other one? Which, do we have a prioritized order for restoration, right? Where are we going to put the resources first? Which system do we turn on first? It's kind of like a black start. You know, when everything power goes off, which one of the generating stations do you use to bring the grid up? You have to have these things planned, right? And then put the monitoring in place that once you have identified it and prioritized it, you're looking for the threats against those systems. You're evaluating them for those vulnerabilities that I showed you that were 15 years old that maybe you should take a look at someday, right? I know in OT patching, and that is hard. We can't do it the same way that we do it in IT, but that does not, you still should have that list. You still should know where you are vulnerable so that you can prioritize the investment in making those vulnerabilities go away. Talking to your vendors, telling them you don't want to have a system that still runs on Windows 7. I want to have it, or XP, or DOS 3.3, or something older, right? We want to have something newer that has more capabilities or flexibility with regards to that. Okay, so I apologize a little bit. I'm going to use some slides that are Tenable product specific, just to show you the concepts that I think you should be addressing. But you need to make the decision with the vendors out there how you're going to address this, right? So don't look at this as a sales pitch. Maybe it's a little bit of a sales pitch, but it's not a big sales pitch, right? When you're looking at your assets, and you look at this in the Purdue model, right? You've got the OT assets at the bottom, you've got your demilitarized zone, your remote access, you go up all the way to the enterprise. I maintain that unless the technology that you are using can see all of it and give it to you in one place to be able to prioritize, you're going to miss things. And typically in the operational technology space, we have these sort of custom OT, ICS tools, but I think you need to be able to look at a suite of vendors that can bring all of that together. Because remember what I said earlier, it's that one system that's tucked away that is the most important. It's the crown jewels sort of the company that you need to protect. And unless you can bring that data together, prioritize it using the same sort of formula or mathematics, you know, you will think something is less important than it really is. So you need to be able to evaluate this, right? And you need to be able to evaluate how do the communications flow from one of these networks to another. And when they change, what risk is that to my company, right? So if I see something new show up, or if I see that, you know, there's a pathway from the internet that all of a sudden, ooh, I have a PLC down here that now is visible on the internet. That's probably bad, right? You should have tools in place to be able to evaluate that. OT, this can be challenging because remember I talked about the fact that you use a lot of commercial off-the-shelf hardwares and softwares, right? So you use Windows. So if you look at these OT cybersecurity solutions, a lot of them are very specialized. We have one specialized for the controllers or the PLCs or the RTUs or the industrial devices, half of your assets in the OT side are IT assets. Printers, servers, workstations, clients, running all the different IT software, right? So make sure that the solutions that you're looking for have just as much capabilities or more to look at and manage your IT assets that are in your OT and these other environments as your OT assets, right? Again, you need to be able to look at that together. Another issue is that a lot of times these are very quiet assets. They do not really communicate because they're low bandwidth, low latency types of installations. So you need to be able to have a system that can elicit the responses out of them, right? We call that active query. Other people call it different things, but you need to be able to essentially interrogate the device in a nice, polite, safe, reliable way to get it to answer these questions, right? So again, product slide, I'm sorry, but you need to have that blend of technologies. You need to be able to listen to the networks passively. You need to be able to talk to the devices using safe, reliable industrial protocols, right? The same protocol that Siemens uses to talk to their PLC, you need to have your inventory program tools be able to ask the same questions of that PLC to tell you how secure am I? What versions of firmware am I running? What is my configuration? We can ask this controller what its configuration is, right? So the logic, and then take a copy of the logic so that you can store it and see any changes against it. These are the kind of tools that are possible now. You know, people would ask me maybe 10, 15 years ago, you know, and I would say, we don't have the tools to be able to properly secure the control systems environment. It's too sensitive. You know, we will break things if we try to, you know, go in and use contemporary tools. That's not the case anymore. We have the tools. The people out there, not just Tenable, but the people out there have the tools to secure the control system environments. What we lack is the discipline to do it and the people to do it, right? So don't spend money on my stuff until you've hired the right people to implement it, right? Because if you buy the black box with the blinky blue lights and you plug it in, but nobody's checking, nobody's looking at the data, nobody's taking the backups and testing the backups and making sure that they work, you're investing in the wrong thing. You need to invest in the people, right? So that we solve that people problem or discipline problem first. You know, in IT, we tend to have a big security stack. We have 5, 6, 7 vendors. We have a vendor for this. We have a vendor for that. We have all these different vendors looking at the data to do very specialized things. In OT, it tends to be the opposite. They want one vendor. You do it all in the OT system because they want a very small security stack in the OT environment. That was kind of the point here. And so many of these OT solutions are not just asset management, are not just vulnerability management. They're threat detection. They're doing many more things. So you should look, I think, with a broader lens at what the tools can provide, right? Okay, couple more slides. We're almost done. If you remember back to the Colonial Pipeline incident, do you remember how I said they got in? One password, right? One password on a legacy device. And then they get in and they spread laterally inside of the system, inside of the domain. Another aspect of what you should be monitoring or you should be evaluating inside of the control system environments and your IT environments is Active Directory and credential control, right? So how are you managing the credentials in your environment? How are you managing these settings? And I'll tell you that many, many times, if you go and look in these OT environments, everything is running as domain admin. Everything. Every single service on every single computer. And it should not be that way. Now, you may have some arguments with your vendors about what privileges are needed for this service to execute, but I would encourage you to use, again, some of the tools that have been developed in the IT environment, specifically in your OT environment for weaknesses, right? So a lot of the ways the ransomware spreads is with privilege escalation. They're getting that one password, they're elevating their privileges, then they're using the Windows administration tools themselves to copy the ransomware around to different computers and different boxes, right? So evaluate these weaknesses, right? In Active Directory specifically, and how you do credential management, identity management, right? It's not just the assets, it's the people, and it's the passwords and the identities that they use to do their job. Okay, so we're in the last minute or so here, but I hope you will save some questions for the panel afterwards. So let me kind of quickly summarize. Ransomware is not going to go away. Criminals are making way too much money, okay? So it's profitable for them. If it's profitable for them, they're going to continue to invest. They are building ransomware as a service, sort of hotlines, call centers. You know, these are smart people. This is not like somebody opening their coat and saying, hey, you want to buy a CD of ransomware? No, it's like this is a whole organization that you're partnering with. There are ways that we can use the tools and the people, if you get the right people in place, to better protect yourself. You can never be 100% secure, right? But you can be better than the neighbor, right? And so with cybersecurity, you know, the whole issue is, you know, it's kind of like the story with the bear. I don't have to outrun the bear. I only have to outrun my friend, right? Because the bear will eat him first if he's slower than me. So security is similar. If the criminal finds it's too much effort to break into your system and spread your ransomware, they're going to pivot to somebody else, right? They're going to go to a target that's easier, that's cheaper, you know, that they can get their results faster. So, yeah, so that's basically, you know, that's basically my talk this morning. I will be here the rest of the day today. I'll be here tomorrow as well. So come over to the booth, ask me some questions, and have a cup of coffee, and we can talk about, quite frankly, we can talk about anything you want to talk about. So with that, thank you very much.